Myth number 3, all sex workers are women. Reality, men, non-binary, and trans people also do sex work, and ignoring them erases real needs, advocacy, and data from the conversation. This myth isn't just about who people imagine when they hear the words sex worker. It's about who feminism has historically chosen to see and who it has chosen to leave out. Much of mainstream feminist rhetoric around sex work has centered cisgender women, casting them either as victims in need of rescue or as symbols of patriarchal exploitation. That framing makes men, trans people, and non-binary sex workers invisible, as if they don't exist or their experiences don't count. Why does this matter for feminism? Because when feminism relies on a narrow, one-dimensional picture of sex work, it repeats the same exclusionary patterns it claims to resist. It prioritizes the experiences of some women, usually white, cis, and middle class, while erasing others, and it denies solidarity to entire groups of people who also face gender-based violence, stigma, and criminalization. By refusing to see the full spectrum of sex workers, feminism weakens itself. If our goal is gender justice, then we can't build it on myths that erase men who sell sex or trans and non-binary people whose survival often depends on sex work because of systemic discrimination in housing, healthcare, and employment. A feminism that only protects some women while ignoring or even harming others, and everyone else who doesn't fit neatly into that category, isn't feminism at all. Why this myth exists. This myth sticks around because mainstream conversations about sex work are often filtered through the lens of sensationalized media, rescue industry campaigns, and outdated feminist frameworks. When people hear sex worker, they imagine a cisgender woman standing on a street corner, and that image is both limiting and dangerous. It erases the realities of male, trans, and non-binary sex workers who often face even greater stigma, invisibility, and vulnerability. Ignoring the diversity of sex workers doesn't just distort the public narrative, it actively undermines services and policies. For example, studies show that up to a third of sex workers in some regions identify as men, and trans women and non-binary people are disproportionately represented in both online and street-based economies. Yet funding for services almost exclusively targets cisgender women, leaving others without culturally competent healthcare, legal resources, or community support. This invisibility also creates loopholes in research and advocacy. When data collection assumes all sex workers are women, critical needs like HIV prevention for men who trade sex, safety planning for trans street workers, or labor protections for full-service workers of all genders go unaddressed. And when anti-trafficking laws and rescue programs are designed around the image of the helpless cis woman, they miss or criminalize entire populations that don't fit the stereotype. The truth is simple. Sex work is as diverse as humanity itself. Men sell sex, trans people sell sex, non-binary people sell sex. Ignoring them isn't just inaccurate, it's harmful. If we're serious about equity and justice, then our policies, research, and feminist advocacy must reflect the full spectrum of who does sex work and what they actually need. Who gets hurt when this myth drives policy? When policymakers assume all sex workers are cisgender women, everyone outside that narrow frame falls through the cracks, or worse, gets targeted. Men who sell sex often lose access to healthcare, housing programs, or HIV prevention services because those initiatives are written with at-risk women in mind. Their labor is ignored, and their safety is treated as irrelevant. Trans and non-binary sex workers, who face some of the highest rates of police harassment, incarceration, and violence, are made invisible in rescue programs designed only for women. This leaves them both over-criminalized and underprotected. Survivors of trafficking who aren't women are erased from policy discussions entirely. If they don't fit the expected profile, they're less likely to be identified, supported, or believed. Cisgender women themselves are also harmed. When feminism props up this myth, it reduces women to victims and erases their agency, ignoring sex workers' own organizing, labor rights demands, and leadership. The result? Billions of dollars flow into raids, sting operations, and gendered rescue programs that don't reflect the real diversity of sex work. Meanwhile, the people most vulnerable, especially trans women of color, undocumented workers, and LGBTQ youth, are left without meaningful protection. In other words, this myth doesn't just distort reality, it directs resources away from where they're needed most and puts already marginalized communities in greater danger. How this myth fails everyone. Reducing sex work to all women all the time isn't just inaccurate, it undermines the fight for justice across the board. Men who sell sex are erased from research and services, which means their health risks, safety concerns, and labor rights disappear from policy conversations, leaving them unsupported and more vulnerable to exploitation. Trans and non-binary sex workers, who often rely on sex work for survival because of systemic discrimination in employment, housing, and healthcare, are written out entirely. By pretending they don't exist, the myth ensures their specific needs, like gender-affirming healthcare or protection from targeted police harassment, remain unmet. Even cisgender women are failed by this narrative. When feminism frames all women in sex work as passive victims, it strips them of agency, silences their leadership, and results in policies created for sex workers instead of with them. And perhaps most tellingly, this myth fails feminism itself. A feminism that only protects some women while ignoring others, and everyone who doesn't fit into a narrow category, ends up reproducing the same exclusions patriarchy thrives on. Real liberation can't be built on erasure. The bottom line, the idea that all sex workers are women is more than just a lazy stereotype. It's a myth that props up exclusionary feminism, fuels bad policy, and abandons the very people who most need support. Men, trans, and non-binary sex workers exist, organize, and lead, yet their erasure keeps resources and protections from reaching them. Even cis women are harmed when feminism reduces them to passive victims instead of recognizing their agency. If feminism is about equality and justice, it cannot afford to build itself on myths that erase whole communities. Busting this one isn't optional, it's the foundation of a feminism that refuses to leave anyone behind.